Dizaleli. All three of you have made direct reference to what is our primary focus today, which is our grave concern about the legitimacy crisis that's produced by the widespread concerns and questions about not just the technical mechanics, but the actual outcome of the elections. And I have a question for all of you, if I could. You've all referred, either in your written testimony or your spoken testimony, to a reasonable process, to a plan B, to an active engagement by relevant powers and the multinational community, to opportunities missed in the run-up to the elections to insist on constitutional changes or to push back on constitutional changes, to insist on better preparations of a technical and logistical nature. The Assistant Secretary spoke of the United States having offered active, prompt engagement in an audit and review, and several of you have spoken of that as being insufficient. I agree with you that this is fundamentally a political problem, and no matter what the outcome is here in the short term of the review of the election, there is a real risk of Congo slipping back into the tragic violence that caused what has been referred to as Africa's World War. If you would, for our benefit, review more concretely exactly what it is you think the United States, or at least this committee, can and should do to engage the international community, to deploy the moral authority and resources of the United States in a way that will make a positive contribution to airing the real challenges of this election and to moving forward towards a productive and peaceful future for Congo. What exactly would you urge us to do, Mr. Schneider?
I think the point that you made is very important in terms of lessons learned. There were moments in the pre-electoral process when at that point a combined international diplomatic message strongly to President Kabila that he was going down the wrong path and this would result in the country being isolated. That was not done. The kind of effort was done on Nigeria was not done early enough here. That's one. Second, now it seems to us that there is an essential need to use, as you stated, all of the moral and political suasion of the international community. You have the largest United Nations peacekeeping force currently in the Congo. They also have political capabilities. Secretary General should be engaged on this. The African Union has a major stake in the Congo moving in the direction of stability. And we believe that the U.S. can be if you will, can help to generate engagement by the African Union and the United Nations in a concerted and unified message to the government of the Congo to permit independent international verification of the process, either with the current government and the CNA or parallel to it. There needs to be full international involvement and engagement at a very high diplomatic level. That thus far is not satisfied by contracting with electoral experts. That's number one. Number two is the Catholic Church took a leading role in the observation with civil society in the Congo. They need to be a very strong dialogue partner in how to move forward. Similarly, civil society in the Congo is very active. They too need to be engaged fully in this process. And here again, the United States does have a record of dealing with the civil society, and it should be part of what we do moving forward in order to, in a sense, give them some of the resources necessary to engage in this process. But the fundamental issue is independent international verification, and with the purpose, as I said earlier, of enfranchising those who were disenfranchised in order to try and move to a position that you do know who won the election, and initially aiming at preventing the country from slipping down the path into regional and ethnic violence. And we already see in Katanga some of that taking place.
Thank you, Mr. Schneider. Mr. Gambino.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Certainly a question that all of us are thinking about a lot and talking to people in the Congo and around the world about what are appropriate, very concrete steps to take. In addition to agreeing very strongly with the points that Mark just made, let me just add two. And I want to comment very specifically on some of the points that Assistant Secretary Carson made, because what we can see is a movement in the part of the policy of the United States. At the beginning of this year, when the constitutional changes were made by President Kabila, moving from a two-round system to a one-round system, The only comment on this came from our ambassador in Kinshasa, who referred to the change as an internal matter, made no criticism whatsoever of the change. As many of us urged much greater involvement and concern, we kept getting replies that things were on track, that the Electoral Commission was really doing a very good job, that the elections with the support from the UN mission, from MONUSCO, would work out fine. We were looking at it closely. It really didn't look that way. We kept saying, please think about it more. Didn't happen. Now we get to this, and we continue to see some movement on the part of United States policy, a statement released yesterday by the State Department spokesperson. But here are the 2 points I want to make. We still talk about working within existing legal remedies. But let's look at the Electoral Commission. Does one really think that the personnel of this Electoral Commission that were responsible for this charade in front of us, that we should expect the people of the Congo to rely upon them and have faith in anything they do? I don't see how one can credibly assert that. You keep the institution, but you certainly have to change the personnel. That seems to me very fundamental. I spoke about that in my testimony. The Supreme Court is to make a ruling, and in the present system there, that they're supposedly the ultimate arbiters. There I would defer to the head of the Catholic Church in Congo, Cardinal Monsenguo, who in a superb statement of just a few days ago urged the Congolese Supreme Court to do the right thing. But reading between the lines, if you will, there's the sense that it is not the end of this process unless the court does the right thing. So let's see what the court does. If they do the right thing, whatever that might be, then we move in one direction. If, on the other hand, they reach a decision that looks as flawed as some of the actions we've seen from the Electoral Commission, then we're going to have to look very seriously at other activities like the ones talked about by Mark Schneider. The final point on that is that Assistant Secretary Carson, in his testimony before you, in addition to using the phrase existing legal remedies, also used the word rapid, that we need to work on these things rapidly. Now, I recognize that one wants to get out of this crisis as quickly as possible. But if you look at the mess that has been created by all these irregularities and vote manipulation and everything around this country, with 18 million votes cast and all the problems, it's not going to be sorted through in a matter of a few days or a few hours. It's just not possible given the scale of this. So we have to start to be reasonable about two things. One, how long is it going to take? And then if it's going to take a period of time, which I strongly suspect it will, what are the implications for maintaining short-term stability in the Congo in terms of governance, structures, and other support that comes from us and others around the world?
Thank you, Mr. Gambino. Mr. Diesel-Lilly.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I think thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the first step is really the message of the United States. Our message has been, frankly, pathetic. I mean, at a time where Secretary Clinton is urging the Russians, to march in the street and reclaim their rights, we're getting a message that is very rosy when it comes to the DRC. Between the two countries, we know which countries has suffered more calamities and which country needs this more than the other. You can answer that yourself. But it's ridiculous that for the entire process, my colleagues have mentioned, the U.S. has given a nod to the process when everybody knows. It's been really, really despicable, and I think we need to change that. If your committee can start sending the strong message that the U.S. stands for something, we should not be sounding like Chinese. And so far in Congo, the U.S. diplomacy is not different from the Chinese. We cannot continue like that. So I think we need to put pressure so that, like my friend Tony has just said, we should put pressure so that the process is not expedited. There's no point to expedite the process if this is going to unravel, not maybe in 6 months, but maybe in a year. Congo is, as things are, this is a ticking bomb. So we need to insist Congo depends on us. I know that it's a sovereign country, it's my homeland, but it's a sick country that depends on us. So we have tremendous leverage on the DRC. The State Department doesn't like to think so, but I'm sure they know that they have tremendous leverage that we've not been used. We should use those and insist on a delay on the certification of result. And then we will follow what both Tony and Mark have just mentioned, to start looking beyond the technical review, the politics of it, so that the disenfranchised Congolese voters finally will get the voice heard. This may mean that Kabila is proclaimed president, but people will have confidence in the process. And we also, I think more importantly, this is something that has not been discussed often, is the crisis of personalities as we look at this. Mr. Tshisekedi and his group of opposition leaders have terrible relationship with the diplomatic community. And in the process, the diplomatic community lose sight of what really is at stake and start, shortcutting people. But that's not really the issue here. The issue is beyond President Kabila and beyond Tshisekedi. So we need to look at the process, keeping that in mind. Thank you.
Let me, if I might, Mr. Tizolele, seek a clarification of your earlier testimony, because you spoke in fairly stark terms, as if the United States focus efforts by the Congress to make some impact on conflict minerals or on sexual violence were misplaced or misguided or ineffective or wasteful. Or what I think you were trying to convey to us was that these are important and vital issues that deserve attention, but that they exist within the larger context of a country whose politics and whose governance are the main enduring problem. And if we don't fix political legitimacy and we don't, on the behalf of the United States, engage in governance questions, then we can do all the work we want to through Dodd-Frank and conflict minerals and so forth, and we won't have addressed the real driver. Was that your point?
Very much so, and I will just illustrate a little bit. Congo is the size of Western Europe. Mm-hmm. So for us in the U.S., it's 1/3 of the United States from the Canadian border to Florida. If we look at Vermont as Eastern Congo, what's happening in Vermont is important for the country. Right. But to claim, part of the problem is women that are being raped, they need help. There's no doubt about it, they need help yesterday. But that area, the Kivus are part of a greater country, which is actually what's happening in the Kivus happening because of what is not happening in the rest of the country, not the other way around. If women are being raped in the Kivus, they bear about 3 questions that anybody asks, whether you're a Tibetan or Chilean or Congolese, is why, pardon my French, the hell are these women being raped? Where is the government? Is anybody protecting them? We've lost sight of that when we look at these issues. Or if we look at the conflict minerals issue, then the issue is like, hey, why is this looting happening? Is there any responsible? Is there any adult in the house? And where is this adult in the house? We should be starting putting pressure on the adult in the house and not create a set of schemes that keep on perpetrating the problems. I'll just finish with a story. I visited the Panzi Hospital, and Dr. Mukwege told me a story of a young woman. I'll name her Sifa. Sifa was about 13 years old. She came from Shabunda, where she had been raped. She came to Panzi. For those of you who've been to Panzi, Panzi is a small hospital. It's famous, but it's very small. While this woman was being treated, she used to do her makeup every morning and talk to the doctor and say, Papa, you see how beautiful I am. Whatever happens, don't send me back to Shabunda. 6 months later, after she was fully healed, Dr. Mukwege, against his own judgment and against the will of the woman, but because of capacity problem, sent her back to Shabunda. She came back about 6 months later. She was raped again, and this time it was very bad. The surgery didn't take. And as they ran further testing on her, they found out that she was HIV positive. So this woman, this Shabunda girl, she doesn't want the U.S. to just give $17 million, as Secretary Hillary Clinton promised when she did the tour of the area. She wants this to stop. And in order for it to stop, we, the international community and humanity, have to have the courage and say this has to stop. Start arresting people, starting putting pressure on the adult in the house, which is the Congolese government, not the UN, because often we displace the discourse. Then we blame the UN, we blame everybody else, and we give free ride to the government. that's the kind of thing that I wanted to. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Senator Isaac.
Mr. Snyder, you said that there was obvious fraud in certain regions or provinces and there ought to be a revote in those provinces. And then, Mr. Gambino, you said the whole election was clearly fraudulent. Do you think there should be a revote in the entire country?
Senator Isaacson, that is an extraordinarily important issue. I think the Congolese themselves are going to have to think that through with help from international actors, experts, and others to think through a way to get to a reasonable democratic outcome. As I look at it, and I've looked pretty closely at the results around the country, we see obviously fraudulent results in Katanga. You have 3 large areas amounting to about 750,000 votes, where in 2 of them the results are 100% of the voters voted for President Kabila. So you can go through, and I've done this, hundreds of pages of results for each voting station where there were roughly 400 or 500 Congolese voting. Every single voter, we are to believe, went and cast his or her ballot for President Kabila in over 500 of these polling places around each of these areas, so well over 1,000 just for these. That's one example. In certain areas of North Kivu, there are very clear reports of intimidation and extremely troubling results as you start looking at specific areas. Others have referred to the Kinshasa results. There were votes lost, perhaps as many as 1 million, and Mark Schneider has talked about this, where they know people voted and then the votes disappeared. So we have this. Are you going to be able to sort all that through and somehow come out to something and say, we're absolutely confident that either Joseph Kabila or Etienne Tshisekedi did? If you can, fantastic. I'm a little skeptical, frankly, given the scale that one sees. I would defer to experts. If we don't do it, then we have quite a problem. If you can revote in certain areas, okay. But if those areas amount to most of the province of Katanga, which is the size of Texas, and where over 3 million people voted, a lot of Kinshasa, a city of 10 million people and millions of voters, and substantial portions of other provinces, you see where I'm going. That starts to look like another. I'll just put out one more question for you to consider, and I don't have the answer. The Congolese had a system in 2006, which was a 2-round system. You had over 30 candidates for president in 2006. If no one got over 50%, you went to a second round with the top 2 candidates. That's what happened. You had a second round against the top 2 candidates. President Kabila beat Jean-Pierre Bemba 58-42. It seems to me that as you look at these horribly complex and flawed results right now, there are probably 2 things that we can all agree on. Nobody won more than 50%, and the 2 top vote getters are Joseph Kabila and Etienne Tshisekedi. It may be cleaner to think about some kind of competition that way. One can organize such an election relatively quickly. The Congo is slated to have its next round of elections nationwide in March. So we do have something coming forward. So as you think it through, I'm certainly not making a proposal. I'm just trying to think through with you some of the options that are people discussing right now to work through what is a mess without a clear, clean, rapid outcome right now that most of us see.
Well, the reason I asked the question is from listening to all 3 of you, in particular Mr. Desolé, who's in his comments, I don't think a re-vote right now is really possible or would bring a result that would be any different without fundamental change in the process. Do you agree with that, Mr. Desolé?
I'm sorry, I missed.
I really don't think a re-vote would be possible without to create any other change in the result immediately because of the given corruption that exists today. Is that correct?
I think there's a lot of truth to that, in the sense that Tony just mentioned that there's so many things that have to change. I mean, if we're going to have a revote, does that revote happen with the same team that we have in place? And if it does, then what does that mean?
Well, let me interrupt you because you made the statement, you said parenthetically, you said, well, maybe we ought to just let the president stay in for another year, but then charge them to have another election and structure the vote better. I think that was what
No, I didn't make that
you
statement.
didn't make that statement?
No, that was not me.
Okay. Was that you? Somebody said that.
I didn't say it, Senator, but I do want to make I think what you ask is so important, but I'm actually more optimistic about this than perhaps some others. You know, we're sometimes get a false dichotomy between the 2006 and the 2011 elections. People pretend that in 2006 the international community did everything, and so the elections went reasonably well, and that in 2011 the Congolese did most everything, and the results have turned out as a result. That's actually not true. In 2006, yes, the international community did more, played a better role, was more engaged, but there was a huge role played by a much better electoral commission and a much cleaner election all around. The Congolese did a fantastic job in 2006. I think this time around, as I've said and the others have said, making some changes in personnel obvious, but also with the kind of international engagement that Mark Schneider and others are talking about. Could you imagine, you know, if you came to a second round early next year, for example, Senator, surely you should have some people placed in some of those areas, Congolese observers, where we got 100% results. And there should be a sense that we can, you know, some of these can be done. The Catholic Church had 30,000 observers at this election. Some of these things can be done to get us to the kinds of credible outcomes that must be attained.
Well, more transparency brings about a lot more accountability. There's no question about that.
If I could, it does seem to me that while we can come up with a variety of scenarios to get to an end, that has to be the result of negotiation in the DRC. And that's where I think you need to have a combined, unified international view, high-level former presidents from African countries that are authorized by the African Union, in a sense blessed by the United Nations and supported in terms of trying to bring about a mediation that says, okay, and we believe that it should be a second round for those two, or revoting for these areas, and we will have essentially a parallel process to determine the outcome. But there needs to be, and here's where I guess I disagree a little bit, I do think we need immediate international engagement in this effort at this time, because I'm very concerned that December 19th, you heard the Supreme Court, that's the last date. Well, the Supreme Court decides on these disputes in camera, closed sessions. Given what we've had thus far and what we know, it issues a result that says the preliminary results stand, then you essentially lit a match. And it just seems to me that between now and then, you need to engage the international community to try and bring about some process of discussion aimed at a compromise.
Well, my time's up, and we're about to have a vote, I think, but let me just add a comment to our Marine. Mr. Desolele, when you made your comment, I reflected back 2 years ago when I was on the USS Eisenhower in a NATO exercise in the Atlantic and went down to the mess hall and sat at the Congolese table. There were 10 Congolese volunteers in the United States Navy serving our country on a fast-track to citizenship basis, and I want to thank you for your doing that, and thank you on behalf of the American people.
Thank you very much, Senator.
Yep, we don't know if it's been called yet. Senator Isaacson was referring to, we had a scheduled 4 o'clock vote on the authorization for the Defense Department.
Actually, Senator Isaacson was trying to make an excuse to make an exit because I've got one other stop I've got to make. Thank you all for your testimony.
Well, then let me thank Senator Isaacson for his good nature, his disciplined and steady contributions to the work of the subcommittee, and for the honor of serving with him. You have presented focused and concrete concerns about this election. I'm sorry we have not gotten into more detail about the many other issues and challenges that face the DRC, the role of the newly appointed special representative to the DRC and the Great Lakes, the role that the UN peacekeeping mission can and should play in security sector reform, whether it is reasonably possible to certify conflict minerals as being conflict-free, and whether that's relevant to improving future governance and outcomes in the East and Northeast. what, if anything, more we can and should be doing to promote civil society and transparency, what we can do to ensure a more effective electoral commission and Supreme Court. These are all questions I think are valued and important. Let me first say that I, and I suspect all the other members of the subcommittee, welcome your ongoing input as this very fluid situation continues to evolve. It is my hope to put out a statement promptly, possibly jointly with Senator Isaacson, that reaches our conclusions from this hearing, from all the input that we have gotten, and our offices have gotten quite a bit of input from the Congolese community in the United States, for which we are grateful. And it is my hope that the United States will take an active and engaged role in convening the international community to try and ensure that we do not miss an opportunity. We may well have missed them in the run-up to this election. And as I said in my opening statement, many of us had really hoped that this election would secure steady forward progress for the people of the Democratic Republic of the Congo towards a sustained democracy. I agree with you that this is a moment of great risk, and that there is a real possibility that it will slip, as Cote d'Ivoire did, after a challenged and contested election, into enormous difficulty. There is a moment here, I think, for the faith community, for NGOs, for Congolese civil society, and for the international community to negotiate to an appropriate resolution of what is a flawed election that could produce a political crisis. I am grateful for your testimony today. I look forward to your continued input, and as we move to a vote on an equally important issue for our nation, I am grateful for your passion about improving the lives of the people of Congo and about continuing America's role as one of the leaders in advancing democracy around the world. Thank you very much. We will leave the record open for 1 week from today, given the number of other members of this subcommittee who had expressed strong interest but were unable to join us today. Thank you very much.